If you're getting into Elden Ring recently, or you're starting a brand new game and you want to focus on strength this time around, you've come to the right place. From a personal standpoint, I've always really liked strength-based gameplay. There's just something really fun about being able to use massive weapons such as greatswords in a game like Elden Ring. Of course, getting the best strength build you can be a little bit complicated, but today I'm going to be covering some beginner as well as some mid-game tips. There will also be a few late-game tips sprinkled in there as well. For the most part though, I tailored this guide to be for people looking to make their first strength build or wanting to switch to a strength build later on, so they may not be familiar just yet with all of the components of a strength build. In any case, let's just get right into the video. First, before I even get into things like weapons, armors, and more, you need to understand something about the stats in Elden Ring, especially if you're still new to this game or maybe this is your first Souls-like. Runes are not very easy to obtain in Elden Ring, especially because the more you level up, the higher the rune count per level you need. At some point, leveling up just once may require tens of thousands of runes, and that isn't easy to get unless you're farming. This is especially the case the later on in the game you get. When you start leveling up for a strength build, the most important stats to think about are the following: vigor, strength, and endurance. I would say second to this is maybe stuff like intelligence or arcane or whatever it is if you're combining some type of magic or are using weapons that require higher intelligence and strength like General Radahn's sword. Vigor is important because it's the thing that increases your health stats. When you face off against any enemy, the higher your health, the lower the risk. It also gives you more room to recover from mistakes rather than getting one-shotted by a boss. Vigor is your friend, so level it up as much as you can. I'd say aim for mid-game to be around maybe 40 to 50 vigor, somewhere in that range. Strength is obviously extremely important for strength builds because most of the weapons required for this build are heavy, like the greatswords. These weapons need high strength to wield. Most greatswords, colossal swords, and so on will require a strength stat potentially into the 40s, if not more. For instance, the Crusher Hammer requires a 60 strength level. That's more of a late game, maybe around level 150 sort of stat. So if you're still pretty new or you're in the mid-game stages, just aim for 40. That should cover you for the more at-level weapons. Try to max out strength eventually as you go if you're sticking to the strength build, but you'll likely only get to that sort of level in New Game Plus and so on. Endurance is also important if you want to carry heavy weapons and wear heavier armors. With endurance, your max load can go up, which is good for when you've got big weapons to wield. Just note that you'll likely need to shed your heavy armor for lighter stuff even with higher levels of endurance, especially when you're still at a lower level. I think anywhere hovering around 20 to 25 is good for mid-game just because you may want to deck yourself out in some armors and you'll need a good amount of endurance for that. I mentioned earlier things like intelligence, arcane, etc. I'm not really going to go through those today because I'm just mostly focused on strength. These things are if you want to equip, say, magic or bleed or something extra like that onto your strength build. I won't really get into that for just a pure strength build today. Okay, let's just say you've been working on a magic build since the beginning and all of a sudden you decided, I'm going to switch to a strength build. Allocating runes to do this is way too time consuming. What you need to do instead is to fight Queen Rennala at Raya Lucaria. Finishing her boss fight lets you get access to the respect system, offering up larva tiers, then lets you reallocate your stat points and move them around, essentially creating a brand new build from your existing points. So you're not going to have to spend any new runes or any extra runes to get this done. Do note though that at a lower level you may struggle against Rennala, especially because you need to go through the Red Wolf of Radagon before her, and that dog is quite punishing as a boss. Her boss fight isn't insanely complicated, it's actually pretty straightforward, but having a strong weapon definitely helps. Alright, now that we got our stats business finished up, let's talk about weapons. Strength builds are based around heavy melee combat. You're not going to be wielding staffs or bows and arrows much, and you're certainly not wielding things like rapiers or twin blades, which are dexterity build weapons. The weapons we want to focus on are things like great swords, the Zweihander, great stars, and so on. Basically, think heavy weapons. For more specific classes, you've got the colossal swords, the curved great swords, and the like. These weapons do require more time for each swing than other weapon classes, but the difference is in dealing staggering levels of damage with that particular swing. When you pick up a weapon or buy one, you can see that it explains the required stats to properly wield it. Pay attention to these figures, because not meeting them means you may not be able to realistically use this weapon. Here are some strength build weapons that are pretty good from the early to mid to even late game stages. Do note you should only carry one of these at a time, as more than this will make your load too heavy to handle, causing your rolls and dodges to not be as smooth as they could be. First, we've got the Guts Greatsword. This one's a classic and it's absolutely fantastic. It's part of the Colossal Sword family in Elden Ring. It's basically just a giant block of metal, but it's really good and it's kind of like all reliable basically. Next up is the Starscourge Greatsword. You earn this weapon upon defeating General Radahn and in trading in his remembrance. It's absolutely amazing, powerful, and heavy, so do be careful with your endurance stats and you will need to level up intelligence to at least 15 to use this blade. There is also the Ruin Greatsword, which you can get after defeating General Radahn. Basically, you're going to go back to the area before you headed into Radahn's fight, and it's going to turn into a boss fight there where you're going to have to face off against two bosses, a Crucible Knight and Leonine Misbegotten, but after you're done with this fight, you're going to get the Ruin Greatsword. There's also the Giant Crusher, which you might have heard being referred to as the bonk weapon because it bonks enemies, but again, this is like a late game 60 strength level requirement weapon. There's a ton of weapons out there. There's this Vihander like I mentioned before. There's a couple of great weapons that you can pick from, but for the most part, just think of a weapon that requires higher levels of strength because that's going to orient itself towards being a strength build weapon. In tandem with this, you'll notice some weapons have a grade next to the different categories such as strength or dexterity. The better the grade in strength, the more oriented that weapon is for strength, obviously, because it scales with strength. So this is something to consider. For example, Bloodhound's Fang is better for a dexterity build and it scales lower for strength builds. So pay attention to this when picking out your weapon. I know Bloodhound's Fang is a super popular one, but if you're going for a pure strength build, it's not really the weapon for that. It's more of a dexterity weapon. When it comes to weapons, the weapon itself is only part of the picture. You also need to think about upgrading those weapons. So this is done through the Smithing Stone system. Now, Smithing Stones are a bit of an interesting system in Elden Ring. You can find them lying around the world. You can find them in caverns, in dungeons, etc. But the most efficient way to get smithing stones is via bell bearings. Now, bell bearings are a whole subject on their own, and a lot of them might require boss fights, but these can be offered up to these two Twin Maiden Husks at the Round Table Hold. Once you do this, you can basically purchase an unlimited amount of smithing stones. Every 2 levels or so of smithing stones are encased typically in a single bell bearing, so you'll need to collect several the higher you go in the smithing stone level. There's also somber smithing stones, which are required for some interesting weapons such as the Starscourge Greatsword like I mentioned earlier, so there's a lot of bell bearings that you're going to have to collect in order to get this done. Smithing stones, once you purchase them, are then given to the blacksmith at the Round Table Hold, and from there you can upgrade each individual weapon you own to a higher level. Doing this will give your weapon a massive boost, allowing you to deal more damage quickly. This way you can easily take on bosses or other enemies without worrying too much. Finally, there's also things you should consider like Ashes of War, Fable Arts, and Magic. If you're going for a pure strength build, you may not be thinking about magic much, but adding something to your blade will allow you to get a pretty cool boost as well as deal more damage. This would be more of a combination build though. You should consider upgrading things like Faith if you're going to equip Knight's Resolve. You can upgrade Intelligence to equip some Ashes of War. For the most part, these are the sorts of things that you want to think about if you want to do a combination build. So for instance, on my Guts Greatsword, I use the Magma Shot, which I got from completing some contracts for Volcano Manor. This basically hits into the ground and unleashes a pool of lava, plus it turns the greatsword into a fire greatsword, meaning that you're also dealing fire damage when you hit your enemies. You may need to boost, like I said before, Intelligence or Arcane or some other categories for these extra things, but trust me, it's super worth it. The possibilities in combat you get with doing combination builds is insane. So when it comes to armors, strength builds might be a bit tough for armor, but I'm going to talk about it anyways. You see, armors in Elden Ring have weights and things attached to them. Now, armor is not really the most important thing you should be worrying about in Elden Ring. You could quite literally run around with no armors or anything at all and be fine in this game. Point being, the armor can help, but it's not the most significant thing because you should avoid getting hit by anything anyways. Armors are rough with the strength build because of overloading your character. The heavier your load, the more sluggish your movements are, the harder it is to sprint, dodge, roll, and evade attacks. Additionally, you'll need to upgrade your endurance to wear the armors you want to wear, which could be quite a lot of endurance points. And if you're not keen on sitting there farming forever, you may not want to deal with this much. Still, I personally love the different armors in Elden Ring, and I like to mix and match sets, so I did end up increasing my points on endurance to carry the weapons I wanted, while still wearing the armors I wanted. Did it take a while? Yes. Did I care? No. Still, don't worry too much about armor in Elden Ring when you're running with a strength build. It's not really that helpful, but it can be nice to have. In any case, it's, like I said, not the most important element of the strength build. At some point, the armors do kind of almost become more for aesthetic purposes. Yes, they can help when you're getting hit and dealing less damage, but like I said, not the most important thing. Alright, a strength build might seem really awesome, and it's definitely great, but there are a few things that you should consider and think about before you start charging in to fight whatever it is you're about to fight with your new strength build. Although you shouldn't carry more than one strength weapon at a time, you can carry a smaller ranged weapon alongside your main weapon. It won't dramatically increase your load, and having a bow here and there can be useful too. Having a strength build can be difficult because for the most part you are front and center with larger and more difficult enemies and smaller enemies alike. This can make it difficult to evade heavy hitting attacks from tougher bosses. Furthermore, running a strength build means you need to work harder on memorizing attack patterns from enemies and understanding the way bosses move and operate. This is more prevalent for strength builds because of the nature of combat with this sort of build. I do think running a strength build is rewarding though, and to me it's a lot of fun. Don't worry about not being perfect at the combat right away. With heavier weapons your swings take longer but can deal more damage, so you need to work on timing and understand how the weapon you're wielding operates. I will be making more specific strength builds in the future, and I'll be making these sort of starter guides for other builds, so if you find this sort of thing interesting or helpful, do subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those other videos. And with that being said, thank you all for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video and comment below if you're running a strength build or are considering it. Don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, entertainment, and more. I also do post Elden Ring guides and guides for other games on the website, so do check those out if you need some extra help with things. The link to that as well as all our other important links are in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next one.